The moderator is Harriet Kuhnlein, who is a professor emerita from McGill University in Montreal, Canada. Harriet.
Thank you, Mindy. Good morning, everyone. I think that some of us had a long day yesterday and are still sleeping in, but I hope that, that we will have more people as the session progresses. This is our second day, and it's really another fabulous Seeds of Native Health program. And I want to thank again to the Shakopee Mendawakton Sioux community and the University of Minnesota Healthy Foods, Healthy Lives Institute, and Mindy Cursor, of course, for her respectful and confident management of all of this. The people and the program for the conference are in your documents, as you know, and I encourage you to read the abstracts of the speakers and their substantial accomplishments, as well as the abstracts of the sessions that they're going to present. I'd like to remind you, as Mindy did, that the pigeonhole needs to be attended to, and we will have 10 minutes Q&A after each of our three speakers, and then we will have a Q&A session after the panel where they will present at the end of the morning. There are three very different science perspectives being presented this morning. Dr. Frizzell is going to speak about the importance and structure of tribal and university collaborations. Then she'll be followed by Dr. Beckman, who will explain how she and her team are understanding what drives appetite regulation in obese Indian women. Then we have the break, and following that we will have Dr. Te Morenga from Aotearoa in the Maori in Aotearoa, and she will describe a new approach for lifestyle management for the Maori. Each speaker will have 30 minutes, and then there will be the 10-minute Q&A afterward. So I have the great pleasure now of introducing Dr. Linda Frizzell. She has Eastern Cherokee and Lakota heritage, and she is from the University of Minnesota Professoriate in the School of Public Health, and she is also a technical consultant with the Great Lakes Tribal Epicenter in Minneapolis. She has extensive experience as a provider and administrator with Indian health systems. She holds a doctorate degree in physiology, education administration, and gerontology, with a postdoctorate in epidemiology. And as well, she's been honored to be a tribal technical advisor for healthcare and services policy for more than 20 years. So she has a lot to say for those of us working with Indian people in Indian country.
Thank you. You know, at least in my culture, it really humbles you to have somebody talk about you, because I am not allowed to talk about myself. So thank you. That was very nice. And so as I'm looking out across, while I'm waiting for him to pull up my presentation, I have to ask, how many of you folks are farm people or were farm people? Yeah, that's why you're here, right? You always swore that whenever you, quote, grew up, that you'd sleep until noon. Well, doesn't happen. 5 o'clock every day, I'm up, and I cannot get back to sleep. So thank you, parents, for instilling that in me forever. So let's get started, because we have a relatively short time. And what I want to do with this is talk a bit about what I call the R word, which I don't generally use on any reservation because of reasons that you'll soon see. And then we're going to have a very fruitful discussion after my other two colleagues get done. So let me give you a little bit of history about research in Indian country. In November of 2005, the Health and Human Services developed a advisory group called the HRAC, and it's noted in the title. And their role is to facilitate communication. You find that often in Indian country, you have some really good data if you're a tribal employee, but then you want to be able to present that, and the council's like, no. And that's understandable for the backlash. They're more interested, at least often, that the information stay in-house, and they don't care to glorify anything that's been done. So these members that are on this council, you have to note the difference. They are either elected officials, council members, and so on, or they are a person appointed by the respective tribal government, making them a tribal official. I've had the honor to have been a tribal official at a lot of meetings over the course of my career. But it isn't just somebody with a certain heritage. It is, and it doesn't necessarily even have to be an American Indian person. Anybody can be appointed as a tribal official. That is a big deal. So the primary functions of this National Advisory Group is to obtain input from tribal leaders on health research, priorities, and needs for the communities. And this has been going on for a lot of years. Provide a forum through which Health and Human Services operating and staff divisions can better communicate and coordinate American Indian and Alaska Native research activities. And then lastly, provide a conduit for disseminating information to tribes about research findings from studies on health of American Indian population. It's very diverse, and so a lot of the information never reaches other people. It's either not published or it kind of gets lost in the records. At least that's what's happened to date. Today, the 567 federally recognized tribes in this country have constitutions. That's how they were established and federally recognized. As a caveat to this, please note that in 1975, whenever the Education and Self-Determination Act was enacted, that required tribes that wanted to be federally recognized to continue if they use the Western governance structure. In other words, a tribal leader, respective councils, meaning Congress, respective tribal court system, and so on. Generally, the council handles the legislative, so it's a two-wing as opposed to a three-wing like the federal government is. So that causes some issues. Here we go from people that had governed themselves as matriarchal, patriarchal, conquering, or warriors, or spiritual, however the group of folks governed themselves, and now, we have to have an election, and we have to do this in writing, and so it's caused problems. It's been a learning curve, and sometimes folks struggle to meet that government-to-government relationship, and that's what I'm going to really talk about today. So part of the issue with 567 different constitutions, as is the right, some constitutions require election every year, which can make a chaotic situation because once people get up to speed, then the year's half done and so on. Some have staggered terms. It's the tribe's choice, however they want to do it. And then, of course, each tribal government is responsive to their respective citizenship. But the last bullet is important. Researchers must respect tribal governance. A little side story. Whenever I was a clinic director for a tribe, I used to get calls, sadly, generally from university folks, and they would say, quote, we'd like to come to the reservation for about 2 weeks, and you don't even know we're there, and we'll be gone. I'm like, I'm just like flabbergasted. The first time this happened, I'm like, okay, and the benefit to my people would be, and there's just silence. That sort of swoop in and do it to you atmosphere still exists. Now, with the community-based participatory research models, initially it was still the same thing, but those have started to change. So what I'm going to really talk about is the importance of that government-to-government relationship so that the respective governing body is aware of what's going on with their constituents. So the ownership, control, access, and possession of data from tribal populations is controlled solely by each respective tribe. And if you look in the RFAs that come out in federal grant announcements, it says all things, including data, will be owned by the federal government if you use federal dollars. Not anymore. There's precedent set, well, it's probably been almost 10 years ago now by a federal agency that allowed the tribe to own the data. That is the biggest deal in Indian country for a long time. It really puts tribal councils at ease by not knowing. I had opportunities to do a lot of assessments over the years in tribal communities, and the results come out the way they come out, and the tribe calls me and they go, oh, well, I say, hey, it's your data. You can see what the results are. You report how you want to report it. I've already destroyed the data. They must have control. And they also must have control on allowing presentations. Sadly, I've seen presentations, and I'm like, wow, does a tribe even know that these folks are telling people this? Often not. So see what I'm trying to build is sort of an atmosphere of what's happened and why you see pushback about the R word within tribal communities. So I have samples if you want to email me of various data sharing agreements, but it applies to everything, who you're going to choose for stakeholders, how long, duration, what you're going to test, how specifically the stakeholders are involved, and how their lead is utilized. Not the researcher's lead, but the stakeholders' lead. That is key. So if you go to all the trouble, and this happens still today, to write a grant, you're like, woo, and you get awarded it, and then you go out in the community, like, okay, we got this grant to do this, this, and this. It's like, sometimes people are asked to leave. If you would have involved the stakeholders, and that's the first thing I ask whenever somebody says, oh, yeah, we got this grant. I said, well, who did you help write the application? Oh, we just did it ourselves. And I can share with all this state has a lot of really good recent history, but that used to happen with the state. Oh, we wrote it for you. It's like, well, not exactly a great fit. So once again, kind of leading to what the attitude is about, quote, research. So the data sharing agreements have been used. There are national ones in regards to the epicenters, of which there are 12 in this country in each of the IHS areas. And according to the ACA, the Affordable Care Act, each of those epicenters has access to the RPMS system, which is a resource patient management system that compiles data since 1955 in Albuquerque, New Mexico. It is the biggest wealth of information this country has. Current HMOs and MCOs and whatever era you're in for managed care, it is the envy of information that they would like to access, but you have to have special permission to do so. So the last bullet really brings it home in regards to a true model of community-based participatory research. And it takes a very conscious effort to have the community as the driver. What I do is if I go into a community and they've asked me to come in, I'm just there as a resource. And the other thing that I share with folks is the fact that, if there's something that this community would like to visit about, and it isn't necessarily something that I need to be involved or I shouldn't be involved, just let me know, and I'll gladly leave the room. And you can just see the community folks like, okay, all right, well, then let's get going here. But that's just respectful. There's certain things that outside the community that outsiders don't need to know. Okay, so as we rocket along here, the gathering information and its subsequent use has been inherently political. There are reporters out there today that for no other reason than their own personal agenda will sabotage, and I really hate to do press interviews because they always turn whatever I say around to be more sensational, and often what I did not say, so you have to be careful. Historically, American Indians and Alaska Natives have not been consulted about information should be collected, who should gather the information, and who should maintain it. That's a big deal. If you have data, how you protect that even today. And I shared yesterday in a session we had, I'm old enough to not trust the cloud. Not entirely. And especially after the big, 5 million people breached in their credit score information. I'm sorry, I just, on sensitive data in particular, if it's behavioral health data as an example, I'm not putting it in the cloud. But anyhow, information may or may not have been relevant to priorities or concerns of the stakeholders. And what I don't talk a lot about is that we have assessments. Pamela Jumper Thurman out of Tri-Ethnic Center in Denver has a community assessment form, which I've used and tweaked over the years. But basically, it helps the community to understand if they're ready. If they won't talk about such things as opioids, and I had a personal experience there, the community wouldn't talk to me. So there's basically, the only thing I can do is be there as outside support for whenever they are ready. It's changes of change theory that if they aren't even pre-contemplating it, help them along until they realize, and then you'll be productive. So if a community isn't ready, it might work for a 3-year grant term, but then it isn't going to be long term. The third bullet there about the agendas of outside researchers, I don't mean to be negative about that or concerning, but outside researchers should not be allowed to have an agenda to research within a community, any community, really. Now, they can ask for that, and you can provide very, very high levels of significance that people may or may not want. But I have to tell you, you go into any community and say, oh, yeah, this research, we got a 0.001 significance level. The community's like, okay, so. But if you were to say, yeah, 99% of the people that we provide the intervention for had some sort of change, it's like, oh, okay. So you see the difference in the lingo? And then the other preempting meaningful community involvement by presenting completed research designs, which to this day still happens, that they're already funded, and, okay, let's get going, community. Well, you can imagine what the reaction would be. So I only provided one example, and this is probably the most notorious with the Havasupai tribe, but it is horrendous, and I hope there's no Arizona State folks in here. But anyhow, those researchers, until just very recently, were held in very high regard of the very good research they did. But they basically were not truthful with the participants. They only had to pay $700,000, like woo, to 41 people who had their privacy totally breached, and so what they were supposed to do was research about diabetes, and we all know in Indian country that's pretty high need. And the consent form said studying the causes of behavioral/medical disorders. Well, in reality, what was done with these blood samples were things about evaluating genetics, basis of schizophrenia. Think they'd have any negative connotation by the public about that? Oh yeah, well, here's what the data, the research shows. Inbreeding, involuntary, evolutionary genetics. And so this is just so far out of line. And I'm here to tell you today that there's different agencies that I'm aware of here in the Midwest that are doing genome research. And I caution people whenever they ask me about that, have a permission slip, have the permission slip or the consent specific to what they are going to research, and have it a duration of 1 year. And that is pretty much the law, not exactly as it is in writing, but consent forms that are over a year long are generally invalid. So be very, very, very careful. And these are big research agencies that, for whatever reason, it's their agenda, not the community's agenda. So I have to admit, I kind of borrowed this from some of my Canadian friends, but I'm thinking, wow, this is like so perfect. Think about throughout history, all the anthropologists that, oh yeah, here's a tight little group of people. We can just study the you-know-what out of them. And so this elder here got plugged in. And I really like this one. I'll give you a second to read all the things, but it's like, okay, yeah, we'll give you this, this, and this, and just sign on the dotted line. Sound familiar? And then lastly, only one more cartoon. This is what I was talking about, a 0.001 significance level. And this is what happens, sadly. So here's some samples that are available on the web to see. I could not find a lot. What I was looking for was methods and how the researchers treated their subjects, if you will, if they had permission from the tribe and so on. But UCLA has a pretty good reputation about Indigenous peoples, and they use it to strengthen their graduate and undergraduate education. They seek extramural funds to support student and faculty research and carry out university and public service programs related to the center's mission. Another one is, and I've not heard of this one so much, but at Indiana University, quite honestly, I didn't even know there was one, but it provides the institutional structure necessary to carry out research and so on. National Endowment for the Humanities and American Indian Tribal Organizations. And that's a term you have to be very careful of. A tribal organization is an organization that is sanctioned or run by a tribal government. It is nowhere close to the same as an American Indian organization or a Native American organization. It is a tribal organization. Big difference in regards to the law. And we certainly don't have time to go into that. Down at the bottom, we have the University of North Dakota Center for Rural Health. For years, they've been putting out just super information available to everybody. It's been funded by the feds in different areas, and they do a really nice job with the elders. There's a national survey that when I was a clinic director, we participated in, and it's just very, very well respected, which does remind me of something. On national surveys, often to get your tribal communities to participate, and like the BRFSS, there's patent questions which, it's an apples to apples deal. In order to get participation, what I often do, I say, okay, there's some questions here in our community that we'd like to know the answers to, so we'll add them. That doesn't get sent to the national group for analysis, but it keeps our people engaged, it empowers them, and it provides some really good information for informed decision-making by our councils. So that really helps in the participation, is to add to what you have to do already. And then lastly, at the University of Minnesota, where I work in the School of Public Health, and we will be starting a program for American Indians, Alaska Natives as soon as I get the paperwork done and get it approved. But what we're going to focus on is comprehensive with policies, clinic management, cultural humility, environmental case studies, history, brief history, and traumatic trauma, and health equity. In this state, they started about 6 years ago now entertaining health equity. I love equity. Up to that point, we focus, and still today, even at the School of Public Health, we are changing everything. We don't talk just about disparities anymore. And folks, yesterday we're talking about that. Because you look at the millions, well, basically billions of dollars this country has spent on health disparities. You know how far we've moved the needle? It isn't fair. It isn't fair to go to a community and just beat them down even further. But if you talk about equity, which acknowledges the disparities, it also acknowledges the strengths. So whenever I go into a community, they're all sitting there like, oh, okay, here she is again. We're going to talk about infant mortality and economic disaster and so on. And so sometimes I like to kind of wake my audience up and I go, how did you get here today? What did your family do that allowed you to be here? And so people are like, what is going on? I said, what's your strength? What's your resilience? What did your family do? And so people start to change their attitude a little bit, like, oh, well, we aren't going to just talk about all the negative baloney that we have to already contend with, whether we like or not, but we're going to talk about good things. And so it totally changes the atmosphere. And so the state saw that a number of years ago, and we're working on that as we are at the School of Public Health. And then, let me find out where. So the university got this very gracious gift from the Shakopee, Minnewacan Sioux community. And we've been working on that in concert, in collaboration with them for a couple of years now. It's been extremely beneficial. So, let's see here what I got next. This is my parting slide. Now, I permanently live way up north, about 5 hours north of here. And if you don't know it, this is an ice road, which it unnerves some people, but, you know, it's all about 3 foot thick, so, but it does break once in a while or heave. But I kind of like this because you're going off, not in a sunset necessarily, but you're going off in the never, never land. And what I contend, at least at my university, we have a lot of potential here, as all of you do here in this audience, to do really, really great research assessment, whatever you need to call it in your respective communities, to be positive and to benefit the populations it's intended to serve, not just the researchers. Thank you.
Are you ready for that one? Research is needed for funding to address essential issues in native country, i.e. grants. What is one piece of advice you can give to tribes to comfort and prepare us to participate in research?
I have to preface that with one statement. As a tribal Indian, as opposed to an urban Indian, I really take offense that we have to write grants. And whenever I was a clinic director, I mean, never had a life. Weekends, holidays, and was writing grants. We should not have to do that. We should be provided the adequate amount of dollars needed to provide health services for our constituents. And to date, the data shows that anywhere from 40 to 60% is all that has ever been provided. So it requires travel resources and grant writing. In regards to funding, what I'm trying to do nationally is change the RFAs to require a resolution or a document that acknowledges official signature from the respective tribe that they are aware of this, and generally it's by resolution that they endorse it, so that it shows the grant reviewers that, yeah, you know, the tribal folks are involved. They aren't doing this behind their back. And I've reviewed grants for years. You'd be shocked and appalled. Shocked and appalled, because a lot of the other people that are reviewing don't have a clue because they've not worked in Indian country. Once the most profound was there was a resolution included. Everybody's like, yeah, they got a resolution. It was 20 years old. I mean, that's got it. Unbelievable. But research funding, if you do it in concert with the community, can be good. There's things right now that community folks want to know. But there's stigma attached. There's stigma attached with behavioral health. We all know what happens, but people do not care to talk about it. That's readiness. They're not ready to do that yet. But if you there's a lot of RFAs that come out. I serve on a advisory board for the Office of Minority Populations. federally, and there's one that came out in regards to opioids, and that specifically required demonstration of stakeholder involvement. And a lot of the RFAs are documenting that now, too, stakeholder involvement. So, if somebody comes to you and you're a tribal official and they say, well, we got this money, well, look at it and see. But caution them, next time, ask us first. That answer the question?
Here we go with another one.
Yes, tribes already have IRBs. There's a number of them around the country. Dene has one, Navajo. I think Standing Rock has one. Now, don't quote me on these, but there's a lot of tribes that have. And if they don't, they can use the National Indian Health Service IRB, which is a bit of a challenge, speaking from personal experience, but it's there. And you must, if you have unless can be exempted, you still have to make the application to get the exemption, but you must involve an IRB. And oftentimes tribes may share an IRB, but is absolutely critical. And if that isn't in the application to be funded, if it's a research project, it should not be funded. And generally, it's after the fact. If you get awarded the grant, then you have to get IRB approval. Pause. The examples that I'm familiar with are based in the community participatory research realm. And as I mentioned, whenever that first came out, people just sort of like flew over it and did whatever they wanted to do anyhow. And so I've personally, as examples, I've trained university staff in, hey, listen to the community. If you got something that you'd like to offer the community, set up a meeting, use protocol, do the Dear Tribal Leader letter and so on. They all learned how to do that. And then ask permission to visit with folks and sit down. Don't be starting an application. And not that there's anything I said, it's just kind of like a no-brainer. But those particular universities now, they can't keep up with the demand because now they have the reputation, oh, yeah, we listen to the community. We do what the community wants to do, not what the university wants, but what the community wants. So there are some out there. Most of them that I'm aware of, or the trainings I did, were out west. But there's some out there.
Okay. I think it's time to move on. I want to take this quickly.
Yeah. If you email me, I have a 2-day workshop that I do that tells the pros and cons about outside researchers. And it's a copyrighted document, but I'll give you permission to use it. And I've shared it with lots and lots of people. But it sets the components that you need to do for an initial. And often, oh yeah, well, it ended last week. Can we do an assessment? Yeah. So, but anyhow, it's set up that way. So it's for an initial or a ended assessment. And it tells the pros and cons. And there's quite a list of them. And sometimes you're required to use an outside. That's beyond your control. I train. If I go and do an assessment as an outside person, I ask the tribe, is there somebody that you can assign to work with me? I'd be more than happy to mentor them because I think it's really important that tribal infrastructure is built. So, thank you.